Ahmose, the man who we believe is the Pharaoh of the Exodus.
You want to flash that thing? Normally here.
At first, we couldn't locate him, but we did locate his father, Second Henry Tao II. If we are right, this is one of the pharaohs who oppressed the Israelites. According to most scholars, his skull had been crushed by enemy axes. Perhaps those enemies were Israelites, smashing his mummy as they left on the Exodus. We continued on our search for Ahmose. It was hard to locate him because he had been sort of misfiled. But we did locate one of his two wives under some debris in one of the museum's workshops.
Hi, is it possible to reveal the wife of Ahmose?
Just don't move it without supporting it.
According to our calculations, this somewhat discarded glass coffin contains the mummy of a woman whose husband contended with Moses and hardened his heart to God himself. At last we located Pharaoh Ahmose. Here is the man who confronted Moses. Can it be that Ahmose's father remembered the Israelite prince he grew up with, and when he gave his son his Egyptian name, Ahmose, the moon is born, he chose the name because of a play on words. In Hebrew, Ahmose means the brother of Moses. In history, Pharaoh Ahmose is most famous for expelling a foreign nation from Egypt around 1500 BCE. At the time, Egypt was ruled by a people that the ancients called Hyksos. Until recently, little was known about the Hyksos. Then, in the 1960s, their ancient capital, Avaris, was discovered north of Cairo. No one has ever been allowed to film at Avaris. To get there, we needed the cooperation of the Egyptian authorities. They're concerned that in the volatile Middle East, the discovery of biblical artifacts will somehow strengthen modern Israel's claims in the area. As a result, the Exodus is a touchy subject in Egypt today. So we didn't mention Moses, and we stressed that we were interested in Pharaoh Ahmose and the Hyksos he drove out of Egypt. After months of negotiations, we were finally given permits to shoot at Avaris.
Indeed.
This is Avaris, a walled city dominated by palaces. 3,500 years ago, it was surrounded by branches of the Nile. Avaris was discovered by Professor Manfred Bitak of the University of Vienna. Although only a few acres are exposed today, in ancient times, Avaris seems to have dominated the area.
Avaris itself was much bigger. It was 250 hectares, so it extended from here to the east about 2 kilometers, and from here to the south perhaps even 1 kilometer.
In the Hyksos period, this was one of the major residences of Egyptian pharaohs.
Egyptian history clearly states that the Hyksos who ruled mighty Avaris were Semites like the Israelites, and that they left on a mass exodus, known as the Hyksos expulsion.
We have in the Bible the story of the Semites leaving Egypt and going eastward from Egypt. At the same time, independent of the Bible, we have a story of the Hyksos being expelled from Egypt. I think definitely the two stories are related. They're describing the same event from different viewpoints.
If the Hyksos expulsion and the biblical Exodus are really one and the same event, then perhaps we can find a long sought-after proof for the biblical Exodus during the Hyksos period. But most scholars say that the Hyksos and the Israelites cannot be equated because the Hyksos left Egypt hundreds of years before Moses was born. These scholars also say that the chronology of ancient Egypt cannot be tampered with.
You can play with Egyptian dates. You can move them up maybe 10 years and down 10 years, but you can't move up and down 50 or 100 years. That's not possible. And yet many people try to do that. They try to adjust chronology to fit their predetermined notion of biblical history. You can't do it.
But maybe we have to. What if scholars are placing the Exodus in the wrong time period? Imagine the confusion if in the future scholars date World War II to the 1990s. They'll never find any evidence that it actually happened. Currently, most scholars date the Exodus to 1270 BCE during the reign of Pharaoh Ramses II. But some scholars are now breaking with that consensus.
The Bible gives information that would put the Exodus about 480 years before the early years of Solomon, in the middle of the 15th century BC.
Professor Bimson's calculations move the Exodus from its present date to 1470 BCE, less than 100 years from the traditional date for the Hyksos expulsion. These are too close to write off as a coincidence. So we have a new date for the Exodus, approximately 1500 BCE.
The Hyksos and the Hyksos expulsion is what we're talking about when we are talking about the Exodus.
All right. Our new date for the Exodus is 1500 BCE. And we know from the Bible that the Israelites arrived in Egypt some 200 years before their Exodus. In the original Hebrew, the Bible calls the Israelites God's people, or Amo Israel. If we write about our dates, there should be hard archaeological evidence for the arrival of these Amo around 1700 BCE. Kilometers south of Avaris is the tomb at Beni Hassan. It dates to 1700 BCE. Because no one has looked for evidence of the Exodus in this period, the tomb has never been linked to the biblical story. There is a perfectly preserved wall painting here that records an ancient migration into Egypt from the area of modern Israel. As in the Bible, the scene involves bearded Semites riding donkeys and bringing their families and flocks into Egypt. Like the biblical Israelites, they are wearing multicolored tunics. The hieroglyphic inscription on this wall calls these people the Amo, God's people. Looking in the right place, during the right time, we are the first to recognize a veritable snapshot of the migration of the biblical Israelites to Egypt. The Bible records that at the time of their arrival, one Israelite rose to the highest levels of Egyptian power. His name was Joseph, son of Yaakov, Jacob.